Slade Merritt, 37-year-old founder of Meridian Studio Works and husband of Raina Ashworth Merritt, ended his marriage on a Tuesday in April without the courtesy of a phone call first. He did it in the formal dining room of the house Raina had helped pay for with 3 years of quiet, unacknowledged work. The table held settlement papers instead of dinner. His mother, Odessa Merritt, 63, sat near the window with her reading glasses pushed up into her silver hair and an expression that belonged on a woman watching a long-overdue correction. Beside the sidebar, adjusting the angle of her champagne flute as though it were a prop in a scene she had rehearsed, stood Lila Vance, 32, Meridian's newly hired communications director and the woman Raina had suspected for 4 months but never been able to prove. Raina Ashworth Merritt, 34-year-old wife of Slade Merritt, and the woman who had spent the last 3 years quietly building a company her name would never appear on, had come home that evening from the medical center, where her father lay in a hospital bed that cost more per day than some people's monthly rent. She had not taken off her coat. It still smelled of antiseptic and the cold outside, and she had not yet had a chance to explain why her eyes were red, or why her hands had not stopped shaking since noon. Slade looked at her from the head of the table and said, "I need you to sign tonight." Raina looked at the papers. She looked at Lila. She looked back at the man who had once held her face in both hands outside a rented conference room and promised that when everything worked out, the whole world would know she had stood beside him. She asked, "Is she why?" Before Slade could answer, Odessa set down her tea and smiled the way women smile when they have been waiting to say something for a very long time. "Lila is not the reason," Odessa said. "Lila's what became possible when my son stopped pretending that gratitude was the same thing as love." Raina waited for Slade to correct his mother. He did not look up from the table. That silence cost more than the papers. Raina sat across from him and watched him sign his name across 7 pages, one after the other, his pen moving quickly through the waivers, the property division, the disclosure of her separate family trust interest that his attorney, a careful man named Benford Cross, 51, had flagged twice before Slade waved him off. "I don't want anything connected to her father's side," Slade said. "I want this clean." He signed, the pen kept moving. Odessa lifted her champagne flute toward Lila. "To my son," Odessa said, "and to the woman who understands the rooms he was born to stand in." Raina did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She removed her wedding ring, placed it on top of the signed papers, and walked out before anyone in the room could see the exact moment when something inside her went permanently quiet. Outside, the April rain had turned the driveway silver. Raina stood on the front step and felt her phone grate in her coat pocket. The message came from a number she had memorized, but never saved under a name. "Miss Holst, your father's condition has changed. His instructions have been updated. Please come tonight." She stared at her own last name, the one she had buried under her mother's maiden name 3 years ago, because she had wanted a marriage built on something real, not on what doors opened when people heard who her father was. Behind her, through the closed front door, she could hear the sound of a champagne cork. She had met Slade Merritt at a startup pitch event in downtown Chicago 4 years earlier. He had been the kind of man who filled a room with nervous energy, too loud, too eager, one good idea buried under too much fear of failing. He had a prototype for a design collaboration platform and a deck with too many slides and a revenue projection that made the back row of investors shift in their seats. Raina had been there because her old college friend, Maris Delton, 33, trust attorney and the only person in Raina's life who still called her by her real last name, had dragged her along to get out of the apartment for once. Raina had watched Slade Merritt talk himself toward disaster and felt something pull her forward that she could not name then and understood too well later. She had caught him near the exit afterward, his jacket crooked, his confidence visibly draining. "Your retention model is wrong," she had said. "You're counting cancelled trials as conversions. If an investor catches that tonight, they won't think it was a mistake." He had stared at her. "Who are you?" "Someone who has read a lot of financial models," she said. "Fix the table before the 9 o'clock session. Use the word preliminary anywhere you're projecting over unsigned contracts." He had fixed it. The 9 o'clock session had gone better. A month later, he called the number she had left in his phone under the name Raina Ashworth, and 6 months after that she had married him in a small ceremony in November, with Maris as her only witness who knew the full truth of what she was walking away from. She had not told him about Holst Capital Partners. She had not told him about her father, Aurelio Holst, 71, the private founder of a construction and infrastructure empire that stretched from Chicago to Seattle to Charlotte and operated quietly through subsidiaries that most people had never heard of, but most cities depended on. She had not told him because she had wanted to know, just once, what it felt like to be chosen for herself. She had become Raina Ashworth in his world. It was her mother's name. It was not a lie. It was a choice. What she had not understood was that a choice made from love could still become a wound. If the wrong person discovered, it was a door. 3 years of what love looked like in practice. The night Meridian's server infrastructure failed 8 hours before the company's first major enterprise demo. Raina had rebuilt the file architecture from a backup, while Slade paced their kitchen at 2 in the morning, and by the time the sun came up, she had the system running on a temporary host she had paid for herself through an account she kept separate for reasons she had stopped explaining. The pitch meeting where Slade's numbers were too optimistic by 14%, and Raina had caught it in the car on the way there, and quietly corrected the projection on her phone and texted the updated version to his presentation email before he walked into the building. The first time Meridian made payroll only because Raina transferred money from a savings account Slade did not know existed. She had asked Piers Dawson, T9, Meridian's head of financial operations, to process it as an operational advance and never say where it came from. Piers had asked her once, during a late night in the office, why she kept doing it without telling Slade. "He needs to believe he built it," Raina had said. Piers had looked at her for a long moment, and "What do you need?" She had not answered. She had closed her laptop and gone to get coffee from the machine down the hall, and when she came back, Piers had not asked again, but after that he always made sure she had a cup before he made his own. The erasure had not happened all at once. It had happened the way water erodes stone, so slowly that you almost could not catch the moment it began. Leela Vance arrived at Meridian 9 months before the divorce papers. She came with a portfolio of rebranded founders and a talent for making men feel like the version of themselves they most wanted to be. She had sharp eyes and an instinct for what a room was deciding before anyone said a word out loud. The first time she photographed a company event and cropped Raina out of the frame, she had said it was for visual consistency. Slade had not questioned it. The second time, at the winter investor reception, Odessa had stood beside Lila and laughed at something she said, and the laugh sounded like recognition. The third time, Raina had walked past Slade's office and heard Lila's voice inside saying, "She's holding you to who you were before. That's not love, Slade. That's a leash." And she had heard Slade say nothing in response, which was the same as agreement. The night of Meridian's product relaunch gala, Raina caught them in a corridor near the private elevator, Lila's hand on Slade's chest. Not quick, not professional, slow and familiar, the way a woman touched a man whose body she already knew. Slade had looked up and seen Raina, and what crossed his face first was guilt. What replaced it, almost instantly, was irritation. "Don't make a scene here," he said. She had not made a scene. She had gone home and sat in the kitchen and understood, for the first time with complete clarity, that she had spent 3 years making herself smaller to fit inside a life that was shrinking around her. Her phone had buzzed on the counter, the same secure number. "Aurelio has asked about you. Please don't wait until it's too late." She had turned the phone face down and told herself not yet. Not yet had cost her a week. The week had cost her something she could not calculate. The estate was not what most people imagined when they thought of the word. There was no fountain at the gate. There were no marble columns. There was a long gravel drive through old oak trees, a fieldstone house with high windows and warm lights burning inside, and at the front door stood the housekeeper, Alma, 67, who had been with the Holtz family for 31 years, and who opened the door before Raina reached the step. Alma took one look at her face and did not speak. She simply stepped aside, and the silence between them was its own kind of mercy. Inside the study, 2 people waited. Stroud Vale, 60, General Counsel of Holst Capital Partners, and the executive tasked with managing trust succession, stood near the window with a leather binder in both hands and the careful expression of a man who had prepared for this night for a long time. Maris sat beside him. She had arrived before Raina, which meant Stroud had called her, which meant everything had moved further than Raina had been ready to face. Maris looked at her and did not apologize for being there. "He passed 2 hours ago," she said. "In the room he asked to be moved to so he could see the courtyard." Raina sat in the chair near the desk, not the chair behind it. She was not ready for that one yet. Stroud opened the binder. His voice was steady and careful, because steady and careful was what the moment required. "Your father's trust instructions are now active. You are the sole controlling beneficiary of the Holst Family Trust. The trust holds the majority position in Holst Capital Partners. Rayner looked at the far wall. There was a photograph of Aurelio on it from 30 years ago, before the grey in his hair, before the weight of what he had built had begun to show in the way he carried his shoulders. The current enterprise value of Holst Capital and its subsidiaries, Stroud continued, is estimated at approximately $15 billion. Maris watched her hands. They had gone very still in her lap. He knew, Rayner said finally. He knew I would try to give it back. Stroud's expression shifted by something small. He left a letter. The envelope was cream-colored heavy paper, Aurelio's handwriting across the front in his careful angular script. For Rayner, when she is ready, not before. She opened it. The letter was 2 pages, both sides, and her father's voice came through every line the way it always had, direct, without flourish, with the kind of love that did not know how to be soft but knew how to be true. You hid yourself to be loved honestly. I was not always patient with that choice. But I understood it because I made a version of the same mistake once, and your mother paid for it in ways neither of us ever named aloud. Do not let me pay mine by leaving this to strangers. Do not use what I have built to prove a point to a man who could not see you. Use it to protect the people who depend on it without ever knowing your name. That is what power actually looks like. The rest's just noise. Rayner folded the letter back into its envelope and placed it on the desk beside Stroud's binder. Tell me what needs to happen before morning, she said. She did not call Slade that night. She thought about it. The exact second her thumb hovered over his name in her contacts, and then she put the phone face down. Not because she wanted revenge. Because she finally understood that love purchased at that price would not be love. What she did instead was spend the next 3 weeks learning the weight of what she had inherited. She walked through a Holst infrastructure project on the south side where engineers knew her father's quality standards better than some executives did. She visited a regional hospital in Charlotte that Holst's private credit arm had kept solvent through 2 years of pandemic debt. She sat through briefings on energy contracts, real estate exposure, and the quiet machinery of capital that moved without applause. She asked specific questions. She stayed late. She read the secondary documents, not just the executive summaries. There was a board member named Crandall, 58, who had served under Aurelio for nearly 2 decades, who made the mistake in her second briefing of leaning back in his chair and suggesting that decisions should move more quickly now that leadership had been resolved. Rayner set down the report she had been reading. This division has 2 credit renewals due inside 6 months and 1 acquisition under review built on projections that predate the Q3 client loss. Which of those do you consider resolved? The room stayed very quiet. Crandall did not make the same mistake again. She told Stroud she did not want a formal announcement until she understood what her name on a document could actually change for the people those documents affected. So for 6 weeks, the broader professional world knew only that Holst Capital had activated succession, and that a chairwoman would be introduced at the annual investor conference. The invitations went out under the designation, HC Chairwoman, R. Holst. Across the city, Slade Merritt did not notice the name on the conference materials because he was too busy preparing for Meridian's largest pitch yet. Lila had told him the Holst Capital Conference would be the room that made them untouchable. Meridian had submitted materials to Holst's Strategic Investment Review, a program that operated externally under the name Crest Ridge Partners, which was what it was called when it was not being traced back to Holst. Lila had found the submission window. She had said it was exactly the right size fund for where Meridian was heading. She had not known who controlled it. Piers had known something was wrong when Crest Ridge's due diligence request arrived with questions that were not routine. Questions about vendor contracts, questions about executive relationships, questions about the firm that had been paid twice its original scope over 18 months, and whose invoices listed billing categories that shifted depending on which version of the file you opened. He had tried to talk to Slade about it twice. The first time, Slade said Lila's firm was not a vendor relationship because it was a strategic partnership. The second time, Lila was in the room and the conversation ended before it began. Piers sat in his office afterward for a long time. He thought about the night. Rayner had paid the company's first payroll from her own savings and made him promise not to tell Slade because Slade's pride was already bleeding from every direction. He thought about every pitch number she had quietly corrected, every system she had rebuilt in the dark, every meeting she had fortified before Slade walked in and took the credit without knowing there had been anything to fix. Then he opened the secure submission link from Crest Ridge and uploaded the original invoices. The memo Slade had never answered, and the email chain that showed the billing reclassifications had been made after the due diligence request arrived. In the message box, he typed one sentence: "You should know what was not disclosed." He pressed send. The screen confirmed receipt. Outside his office window, the Meridian logo glowed steadily against the night, and Piers understood that what he had just done was the most honest thing the company had witnessed in over a year. The conference room held 200 people when the lights went down. Slade was seated in the fourth row with Lila on his left and a speech in his inside jacket pocket that used the word inevitable more times than any honest document should. He had his phone in his hand. He had seen the name R. Holst on the program that morning and thought for a single, quickly dismissed moment of Raina's father, of the calls she used to step away to take, of the messages she deleted before he could see forth the spin, of the name Ashworth she had always signed and never explained. He had told himself it was a common enough initial. The lights softened. A logo appeared on the stage screen, the Holst capital mark, which he recognized from one of the due diligence emails. The announcer's voice came through the speakers, calm and certain. "Please welcome the chairwoman of Holst Capital Partners, Raina Holst." The applause began before he understood what he had heard. She walked out from the left side of the stage wearing a dark suit with her hair pulled back and small pearl earrings, the same ones she had worn to his first investor dinner 4 years ago when he had been too nervous to eat, and she had talked him through the menu so his hands would stop shaking. She did not look at the fourth row. She walked to the podium as though the room had been expecting her specifically, because it had. Slade stopped breathing. Beside him, Lila had gone completely still. Raina placed both hands on the podium and looked out at the audience. "My father built Holst Capital on one principle," she said. Her voice moved through the room without effort. "Capital is not power. Capital is trust that has been structured, and trust, once damaged, is more expensive to repair than any balance sheet can hold." She spoke for 12 minutes. She did not say Slade's name. She did not say Meridian, or Lila, or Crestridge. She spoke about accountability, about companies that chose image over governance, about leaders who mistook visibility for credibility. And when she announced that Holst Capital was implementing new disclosure standards for all strategic capital candidates effective immediately, she let the silence after the announcement do what she did not need to do herself. Slade's phone vibrated. A message from Piers: "They have everything." Then one from Benford Cross: "Emergency call now." Then one from Odessa, in all capitals, 3 words long, that asked a question she should have asked 3 years ago. On the stage, Raina stepped back from the podium as the applause returned. Slade stood up before he had decided to. He moved into the aisle and forward and said her name too loudly, and the man positioned near the stage steps, composed, unhurried, stepped between them without any particular emotion. "Sir." "She's my wife," Slade said. The words came out wrong, and he knew it before they finished leaving him. Maris, who had been standing to the left with a tablet and the composed expression of someone prepared for exactly this moment, stepped forward. "Ex-wife, Mr. Merritt," she said, "by your signature." Slade looked at Raina across 3 feet of conference carpet, and for the first time since the dining room in April, she looked directly back at him. She did not look angry. She did not look triumphant. She looked the way a person looked when they had stopped waiting for something that was never coming. "Raina," he said quieter, "I didn't know." She looked at him for one long, unhurried second. "No, you didn't ask." Then the Meridian board chair appeared at Slade's shoulder, and the conversation that followed had nothing to do with Raina, and everything to do with what he had signed. Meridian did not collapse entirely. The technology was real. The engineers were good. Piers cooperated fully with the Crestridge Review and later helped rebuild the financial division under independent oversight after Slade stepped down from the executive position. Lila's firm lost 3 clients within a month of the invoice documents becoming part of the formal review record. The reclassified billing files told a story that her public reputation had spent 2 years being meticulously constructed to prevent. The rooms she had worked to enter turned out to have standards she had not accounted for. Odessa sent Raina a letter. It arrived at the Holst estate on a Wednesday, handwritten 3 paragraphs, the script unsteady in places. Raina read it once, then folded it and placed it in the same drawer as her father's letter. She did not respond, not because she was unkind, because she had learned that some silences were not punishment. They were simply the space a person needed to begin again without an audience. Slade requested one meeting. Raina agreed with Maris present in a small conference room at the Holst offices on a grey Thursday morning. He came in looking like the version of himself she had first seen leaving a failed pitch, the performance stripped away, the fear visible underneath it. "Why didn't you tell me who you were?" he asked. Raina looked at him without cruelty. "I told you everything that mattered. You just didn't think it was enough to keep asking about." He flinched. "If I had known about Holst." "That's why," she said simply, "because if $15 billion would have changed the answer, then the papers you signed were the most honest thing that happened between us in 3 years. He looked down at his hands. "You stayed when I had nothing," he said. "Yes," Raina said, "and you left when you thought I did." There was nothing to add to that. The sentence was complete, in a way no follow-up could improve. She stood and extended her hand. He shook it, because that was what you did when the door had already closed, and the person holding it had chosen to be gracious about it anyway. 2 months after the conference, Raina signed a worker protection agreement for all Meridian employees retained under the Holst restructuring plan. She used her father's fountain pen, old, slightly battered, heavier than it looked, the kind of object that had absorbed so many important moments it carried them all without showing any one of them. Afterward, she sat in the small break room off the Holst executive floor, not because it was the most important room she had access to, but because it had a good window and the coffee was decent and no one was waiting for her to perform anything. An assistant named Benji, 24, came in to restock the cabinet and stopped when he saw her. "Oh, sorry, Miss Holst. I didn't know anyone was in here." "It's fine," Raina said. He moved toward the shelf, then paused with a cup in his hand. "Can I get you something while I'm here? Coffee?" "Please." He reached for the machine. "How do you take it?" Raina looked out the window at the city below. At the skyline, her father's company had helped build in 17 different ways that most people walking under it would never trace back to a family name. For years, she had known exactly how Slade liked his coffee. She had made it without being asked, had kept track of the ratio like a small private kindness no one had ever thought to return. "Strong," she said, nothing added. She drank it while the morning settled in around her, and for the first time in a very long time, the quiet felt entirely like her own. Some people only discover what they had after they've already handed it back.